What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. Once again, another still worth it video, should you still buy it, whatever the case is. Today we're taking a look at the LG G6 and I kind of want to talk about how it's holding up, since I bought it back last year and I think the year before that, but also how it's going to look like in the future of 2020, whether you should still buy it, 2 months down the line, 3 months down the line, who knows. Now this might seem like a random phone to a lot of you guys, but for some reason my LG G6 videos always get almost always the most amount of views for the swides that I do that year, or not even the most, but like just there's so much love for this phone still, or just so much interest. And I think rightfully so. This phone came out at a time where it was taking a step back but also a step forward at the same time, and I think it was actually a pretty safe phone from LG. And this thing actually was released in 2017 in February, so it was announced around the same time as the Galaxy S8, and we all know with the S8, Samsung took the approach of removing a little bit of bezel, actually a lot of bezel. Eventually they removed even more with the S10, but the G6 followed the same type of route, but I don't want to say follow because it was released very, very closely to the S8's launch. But if you think about it, LG phones have always had very slim bezels on them, so this was no different from what the LG G2 brought even like many years before. And even looking at the front, this thing has a 5.7-inch 1440p IPS panel, and I said this before, and when I compared it to the G7, and I talked about the G7 last year, even a couple months ago, the G6's IPS panel is actually very good for an IPS panel. It's very sharp, 564 pixels per inch. I'm surprised they actually didn't even switch over to OLED, early on. Eventually they did, but this 1440p panel on the G6 is very good still, no complaints from me at all. Surprisingly, we have a USB Type-C port, which is cool. We had that on the G5 as well, but we actually have a headphone jack on this phone as well, which is really cool, and I'm glad they kept that on here. LG is kind of doing some weird things, and if you guys don't know, they actually said something funny. They were like, LG hopes they make a profit this year or something. I'm like, why would that not be the case? Like, if your company, don't you always want to be making a profit? But they do some really weird things sometimes, which I'll talk about in a second. On the back, a dual camera setup, which is actually really cool. When I got this phone, I really didn't know what the other sensor was for, but now obviously, I've reviewed more phones since then and I have more understanding of what it is. So that's really cool. That kind of future-proofed this phone quite a bit, as well as a fingerprint sensor on the back, which I like having that fingerprint sensor right there. Having it on the front, where under the screen is really cool too. But that's also really cool that they kept it on the back. So on the outside, this phone really hasn't aged too much. The only thing is the bezel on the front. Back when it was released, that was actually a small amount of bezel, but now phones have become even more slimmer than that. So this one, it doesn't look outdated or anything, but when you compare it to something like an 11 Pro and OnePlus 7 Pro or Samsung Galaxy S10, those have different approaches to slimming down the bezels, but this one just kind of has a lot of bezel all around it, which I'm not complaining about. It's not horrible, but that is something to kind of keep in mind. So this thing also has IP68 dust or water resistance, which is really cool. You can go up to 1.5 meters of water for 30 minutes, so I'm really happy to say that. And this thing also has a microSD card slot, which is really cool. You can go get the base model of this phone, but expand the storage up with the microSD card slot, so save some money that way, but expand the storage and get like way more storage just by getting a microSD card slot. And that is something that I'm always happy to say. So in terms of the outside, that is pretty much it. Nothing too crazy, but it gets the job done for sure, and it doesn't look archaic. It looks a little bit older, but really nothing. I don't think anybody's gonna complain about the way it looks. Moving on to the software side of things, this thing was released with Android 7.0 Nougat. We are able to upgrade it to Android 9.0. For some reason, my specific G6, I could not get the update to 9.0. I tried my hardest. I tried to do 50,000 things with it. I tried to even plug it into my Mac. Unfortunately, I was not able to install it through my Mac. I had to have a Windows. But any which way I tried to do with it, I was not able to upgrade it, which is so sad. But based off what I've heard, there's really not too many differences between LG's UI on Android Oreo and Android Pie, which I'm actually sad to say because LG's UI is that's one of my least favorite things about this phone. The UI makes me feel like I have some type of child's phone. It just does not feel professional at all, and in some cases it kind of feels too professional. I think early on LG UIs, like with the G3, I think they were trying to take a different approach with it, even with the G4. With the G5, they eventually cleaned it out a little bit, but made it look a little older. And this one, I don't think it's horrible, but it just doesn't look that good in my opinion. And I think the software itself is what limits it a lot. I think the hardware is pretty good, but the software just isn't up to par, especially when we have even One UI. I personally think One UI is better than LG's UI. And I think they call it LG UX or something, so it's LG UX 8 UI. mouthful. So in terms of just the software, you're pretty much done. It's not getting any more software updates. However, you can always root and custom ROM this thing. The G6 is a pretty popular device, so there's a lot of people who are still talking about this, and I think there's still a pretty large development community behind it too. When I had my LG G2 as a main phone, when I was using it daily for like a year and a half, I did root mine and custom ROM it, which was a godsend. I would not be able to use that phone if I didn't do it. So the G6, you have that capability, which is awesome to say. So software support is done. Stock software isn't that good, but you do have that longevity with that custom ROMing option. So that pretty much covers it up there. Now hitting on the performance side of things, this thing has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 821 chipset, a quad-core CPU, and Adreno 530 GPU. Now there were 3 different models of the LG G6, a 32, 64, and 128 gig model, and all those models had 4 gigabytes of RAM. But like I said, it has a microSD card slot, so you can go and expand that storage if you want to. Now what I can tell you about the performance is that it's smoother than I thought. When I'm going through apps, when I'm opening things or closing things, it's actually smoother than I thought, which is surprising. Usually I'm not like that, and I don't say things like that. But for an older Android, this is actually not that bad. The Snapdragon 821 is a bit dated for sure. It's not the latest and greatest, and it only has a quad-core CPU, and it only has 4 gigabytes of RAM, which, isn't a lot. In terms of just app opening speeds and everything, for a majority of users who are going to be using this phone, especially for me, my daily tasks that I do with the phone aren't too crazy. However, I want it to be consistent. I want consistent speeds when I'm texting. I don't want apps to be crashing all the time. I don't want things to be rebooting and all that. And with this phone, I did experience actually some crashes here and there. And it wasn't a completely slow phone, but I can definitely see it as you start loading apps in the background and you start doing more things with it. You can definitely see that this phone will 100% slow down over time, and it just really isn't a consistent device at the end of the day. And I've been using that word a lot this year. I want consistent performance across the board. If it's slow, I'm expecting it to be slow, but I don't like it when it's slow, fast, slow, fast, fast, slow. I don't like that. I just want it to be consistent so I can have a better understanding and give better assumptions when I'm using a device. With this one, it seems a bit glitchy sometimes, and the UI, I don't think it has a lot of background processes, which is surprising. One UI has a lot, so that's one advantage for LG UX8, whatever it's called. But I do think the performance could have been better. So it's not a completely horrible performing device. I would say it's a little bit below average though. It's, not the best thing ever. And in terms of the RAM, with apps becoming more and more demanding, phones nowadays have like 6 gigabytes of RAM at the minimum. This thing has 4, so this might be good temporarily, but once these next generations of phones come out this year, we might actually see some huge dropping of not only speeds and the amount these games and apps take up in the background, but also the sizes of these apps and games in order to keep them in the background as well. So that kind of covers it up in terms of performance. Now hitting on the camera, this thing has 2 13 megapixel cameras on the back. It has a standard lens, and it also has a ultra wide sensor as well, and you can shoot 4K videos at up to 30 frames per second, which is cool. A 5 megapixel front facing camera, and what I can tell you about that back facing camera quality, it's actually not bad. It's actually on the better side of things. You have quite a bit of features built into the camera as well, which I'm really happy about, and I'm so happy LG actually put 2 camera setups on this. One common criticism that I've been giving to a lot of older phones is that the lack of hardware features is one of the killer things about a phone. The quality might be great, the video quality might be great, but if you don't have at least an extra sensor, you will kind of feel like you have an outdated phone just based off these new phones that are coming out, as well as the phones that we had come out in 2019. So all phones nowadays usually have like at least 2 camera setups, you know what I mean? So with the iPhone 11, 2 camera setups, the Galaxy S10e, 2 camera setups, the Note 10 I think had like 3. So with a phone like this, that's a huge blessing that this one at least had 2 camera setups and that ultra wide sensor. I think this was the first phone I ever owned with an ultra wide sensor, and I'm really happy that it was this one because the ultra wide sensor is actually not bad. Like I said, quality, everything is pretty decent. It's not the best quality ever. It's missing a lot of features that you might have on newer phones, but I'm not complaining about it too much, and I think it's on the better side of things for sure. So the camera quality, I give it a thumbs up in my book. Now to end it off with the battery life, this thing has a 3300 mAh battery. As far as I know, there's no wireless charging, so that's kind of weird. But the battery itself, the battery life really wasn't bad when I was using it, but this phone has degraded over time, and I wish I ran a test on it before I scripted this audio, but the battery life definitely isn't what it used to be. I would say it degraded to about like 80%, maybe even less than that, and that's a common thing with used phones. When you get a used phone, it's not going to be at that full 100%, it's probably going to be anything below that. So not a horrible, crazy thing to say, but I would say the battery life is very average as well, and there's a lot of average going on with this phone. There's nothing that's like, oh my god, this phone, did crazy things here. I heard the audio was a little bit bit better on the LG G6. I heard the audio quality in terms of recording was a little bit better too, but I just think there's a lot of average going on with this thing, which when it was released, I understand it was a lot better, but now there's so many other used phones in the market that are way better than the G6. That's kind of hard for me to recommend this phone being like the best one. So what I can answer, if I can answer the question for you, is the LG G6 still worth it in 2020? I would say it's worth it for sure. These things are not that expensive at all. You could probably pick one up for like 70 bucks, 80 bucks if you look hard enough. But I don't think it's the best phone for the price, especially if you're going to go for the used phones. Even the used phones of 2017, I would probably recommend getting a Galaxy S8 over an LG G6. I feel like that phone has a lot more going for it. Even though this one has, twice the amount of cameras on it than that one. I feel like I would recommend that one. Has an OLED display, very awesome build quality as well. I think that one feels better. You're still maintaining that micro SD card slot, and you're technically getting security updates as well, a little bit longer than the G6. And that one also has a bigger development community as well, so you can't really go wrong. I think the G6 is definitely still worth it, but when you look at the other offerings from other used phone manufacturers, I think the Samsung Galaxy S8 might be the better way to go. It's not even that much more expensive than the G6, so that's pretty much it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those things are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.